Okay, they say women are far less represented in the news media than men. That is the latest finding by the Global Monitoring or Media Monitoring Project. Okay, we shall be having Dr. Lilian Ndangam just right ahead in this edition of African Fiesta to diagnose this latest result to us just in this special edition of the show. Don't go away.
Sanguipignan nous regarde. Regarde-moi, regarde. Donatien, regarde. Regarde-moi, regarde. Amadou Adamou, regarde. Regarde-moi, regarde. Maman Zerabou, regarde.
Okay, this is Apex One Radio, and you're listening to African Fiesta number 24. And so, women in general and those in the media particularly have been disturbed following the revelation that there is a continued severe disparity between representation of women and men in the news media. This is the key result of the 2015 survey published by the Global Media Monitoring Project. And according to the Communications Advocacy Agency of the World Association of Christian Communication, that is WAC, with the support of the UN women make up about 50% of the general population, but only 24% of these persons are heard, read about, or seen in newspapers, television, and radio news. Exactly the same level found in 2010. Now, the study that spans between 1995 and 2015 was conducted on 114 countries around the world, and according to the GMMP, not much has changed since then. So, we have Dr. Lilian Ndangam, who is a university lecturer in Canada and a communication research specialist who has just joined us to analyze this latest finding, which some people say is really, really disturbing. Dr. Lilian Ndangam, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ernest.
So, how is Toronto this morning?
We're doing fine. It's a bit cold, but
okay.
It's to be expected.
Right. Now, Lilian, like I said earlier on, you are a university lecturer, but for the sake of our listeners, could you just tell us your university?
Oh, actually, I work as a communication consultant, and I've been doing research. So I haven't done a lot of university teaching.
Okay.
I have used my research skills to work in the non-profit sector, particularly with regards to this research we're talking about today.
Right. And so we are talking about the latest findings of the Global Media Monitoring Project, and it's been said that 24% of women are represented in the news media, which some people think is quite disturbing. Now, does it mean that if I'm exposed to television, for instance, women would just be 24% represented in all of what I'm going to watch in 24 hours, for instance?
Well, it's good to point out that the research focused on news.
Okay.
So this was conducted on news alone in 114 countries. So yes, if you watched news, on average around the world, you will find less women featured in the news than men. If you read newspapers, you will find women less represented in newspapers than men. And we are pointing that out as a highly problematic issue because women make up 50% of the world's population.
Okay.
And yet they are only 24% of people seen or heard or read about in the news. There seems to be a perception out there that women's point of view do not matter. But the media are a powerful institution in society. So what the media says, who is represented in the media matters. It also says a lot about who is not represented. So if women are not seen or heard in the news, it means their point of view and their positions don't matter. So this is what we're trying to point out.
Right. Now, I was just thinking that a typical advocate of women's rights who doesn't understand much about media and society issues would quickly jump to cry foul after, getting this result. And I can understand why. But is this deliberate, or is just natural that men should be more represented in the news than women?
Well, it's a stereotype. It's a prejudice that should be challenged at every turn, because if women make up 50% of the population, why aren't they seen in the media? Yes, advocates for women's rights should jump and cry foul of this, and this is what this research is putting out there. It's essentially calling the media out and holding it accountable to women and the general population, because women are part of society, and media should be representing them equally and fairly, just as they do men. It has been part of the Beijing Platform of Action from 1995. Section J of that platform said the media is a particular area of attention that stands out, because women's equality should be visible in the media as well. So women's human rights are very important and should be counted in media coverage and representation. So women's access and full participation in all forms of power in society are very important, and the media are also intrinsic to that participation. That is what this research is putting out there.
Right. Now, I've been looking at some key findings of this survey, and I would like us to attempt some explanations. The first one is, overall, women remain more than twice as likely as men to be portrayed as victims as they were a decade ago, at 16 and 8% respectively. Now, does it mean stories that that celebrate women's successes, for instance, would be fewer in the news?
Yes, it's fewer to find such stories, for example, because the definition of news itself. When you define what is news, stories that are so-called hard news is what dominates the media agenda. So stories of crime, terrorism, those kinds of issues dominate media. And that is why we find in the research that a lot of coverage of women tends to be of them as victims.
Right.
But the women are much more than victims in society. They are, they're survivors, they're people doing wonderful, amazing things out there. And that broad scope of women's involvement in society need to be featured in media, not just be stereotyped as victims.
Right. Now, there is a global glass ceiling for female news reporters in newspaper bylines and newscast reports, with 37% of stories reported by women, the same as a decade ago. My immediate imagination would be that this only happens in hard news stories, and that you would find women more in soft reporting. Could this be true?
Well, and that in itself is a stereotype. Why would women not be found in hard news? Who defines hard news as a prerogative of men? That is the problem within journalism itself, because it has historically been a masculine-dominated profession. And so certain scopes of journalistic reporting come to be perceived as only what men can do.
Right.
But given the opportunity, women can do just as well. We have female reporters who cover war, they cover politics. There is no need to put barriers out there that women cover just soft news. To find a predominance of women covering so-called soft news, feature stories, or in this research we find women covering health news and education stories, that in itself is a stereotype, that there are particular news topics that only female journalists can report. But on the other hand, we also find good examples around the world of female reporters who do just as well, covering hard news, so-called hard news stories, or stories that are dominant on the news agenda.
Right.
So given the opportunity, women can do just as well. And we're just pointing out in this research that it's the disparity between female and male reporters is not fair on women, and that given the opportunity, I think women can cover just as well as men.
Right.
And to designate particular sections or elements of news as what only men can cover is not fair.
Okay, these are more findings. Women report 5% more stories online, that is 42% in total, than in the traditional mediums combined. Now, this is an important piece of the study, Lilian. Why would women drift more towards online reporting, and does this signal an eventual collapse of their presence in the traditional media?
Well, hopefully not that it signals a collapse in the presence of traditional media, because the traditional media is still important.
Okay.
So my hope is that this also signals that there would also be increased reporting in traditional media to match what we see in the digital media. I think the percentage we find in the digital media just indicates the opportunities that have come and have broadened women's experiences and opportunities for them to get involved in social media. And we would like to see that reflected in traditional media as well.
Okay.
So it's an important shift, and we welcome that, and we look forward to that rising even more when we do the next research. So I look at that as a sign of hope that things will change. But other aspects of the research also show that digital media is also continuing with some of the stereotypes that we find in traditional media.
Right.
So there's reason to be cautious as well.
Across the 6 roles in which people appear in the news, the largest stride in closing the gender gap is in people interviewed based on personal experience. Women comprise 38% of personal experience testimonies, now compared to 31% in 2005. Does this speak well? Is the study portraying here that such roles are inferior as compared to others in news production, Lilian?
It's not so much a question of inferiority, it's also another stereotype. When journalists interview people in the news or they write about people in the news, they have experts, they have commentators, they speak to all these news sources, and when they write about it in newspaper, they say, this spokesperson for this organization or this government agency, an expert speaking this. But when they talk about women, a lot of the time what we found in the research is that women are interviewed in their capacity as speaking from personal experience.
Okay.
We don't have women quoted as experts,
right.
as people who have experience, expertise, or spokespersons for organizations. So that is what we're just pointing out here, that is the stereotype to put women out there as speaking as in personal capacity. Women's expertise need to be foregrounded as well, just as men's expertise are foregrounded in the media.
Lilian, are you saying that if there is some item in the news, the reporter would prefer to get a male expert than his female counterpart?
There is a tendency, yes. That is what we find in the analysis we have done, that male sources tend to dominate in news coverage. And when male sources are interviewed, they are interviewed in the capacity of experts. And women, when interviewed, majority of the time they are portrayed as not as experts, but as people speaking from personal experience, a witness to an issue, people who are bystanders, not actually, compared to men.
Right.
You have fewer women interviewed as experts. Again, some of these findings vary by regions.
Okay.
Like this is a global research, and you will find some of these findings that, vary according to the regions and how much progress they've made in gender equality.
I'm talking about regions. There are distinct regional differences in the overall presence of women in the news. They say North America holds its position as the region with the narrowest gender gap, that is 36%, while the Middle East has the widest at 18%. Latin America has narrowed the gender gap most dramatically over the last 20 years, that is from 16% in 95 to 29 in 2015. Now, Lilian, is there any alarming statistics in Africa you would like to share with our listeners as regards these regional differences?
Not so alarming. It's just a bit of disappointment that there hasn't been much change. Overall presence of women in the news. In 1995, it was 22% for the Africa region.
Okay.
And in 2015, it's still 22%. So it hasn't shifted much. So we didn't see much change in the representation of women in Africa. So that's a bit worrying in 20 years of monitoring women's presence.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the media questioning itself. How well does it represent the African women in its news coverage? So that also is an issue that we think needs to be looked at. I think it's the only region where we haven't seen a lot of shifts, and that's worrying.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is this finding which I deem really interesting, but which needs more explanation. The near balance of television presenters in each age category documented in 2010 has been replaced by significant overrepresentation of younger women as anchors. However, a severe underrepresentation, that is 29% of women in the 50 to 64 age bracket, and women's complete disappearance at 65 years old has currently emerged. Could you explain this?
Yes, it's a worrying trend we find. We have younger women presenters on television. And as women get older, they tend to disappear as presenters on television, while men do not. And that is worrying because, again, that perpetrates gender stereotypes that only young women... I mean, it puts a kind of stereotype out there that people just want to see young women on television. And as the women get older, they don't appear on television anymore as presenters. And we've had cases of women who have taken their organizations to court for unfairly taking them off the air owing to their age. So there's an issue of gender ageism, which is particularly affecting women.
Right.
And that is highly problematic because women of all ages need to be represented on TV, just as men are, because older men appear on TV as presenters much more than women. And that's what we're just pointing out, that there is a gender ageism issue as well, because older women are not featured on TV as presented. They feature when they're younger, and then as they get older, they tend to just get them off the air as presenters. And it also keeps a stereotype out there that younger women are good for people to look at. I know some organizations, certainly in the research I've read in Europe, they find they tend to want to have younger women presenters because they think they're appealing to the audience. And that should make us as audiences question our expectations as well.
Right.
And how we continue to perpetrate such stereotypes.
Her name is Dr. Lilian Ndangam, Communication Research Specialist, and we are looking at the 2015 Global Media Monitoring Project survey result that says only 24% of women are represented in the news media. Now, Lilian, did the study mention in which traditional media female practitioners are more represented?
Yes, we find they're more on radio.
Okay.
Globally, there's more on radio.
I would have expected them more on
41%. And 35% in print.
Okay.
But there are variations to that. I know in, I think it's Romania or Georgia, the profession is much more skewed towards women. There are more female journalists than men.
Right.
So there are variations when you go to look at individual countries or regions.
And the publication of the results of this survey also points out that there is an urgent need to end sexism in media by 2020. Is there something so much at stake here?
Yes, there is. If 50% of the population is not represented in the media, there is an issue at stake. Like I said earlier, who is represented in the media says as much about who isn't and whose point of view matters. Okay. So sexism in the media is a real issue, and we've been working for the past 20 years through the Global Media Monitoring Project to address this. And we really hope that in the next couple of years, the media take a hard look at itself and try and address this issue, because it's an issue of media accountability to its audiences as well.
Right.
Media needs to be held accountable because it's a powerful institution in society, and media content needs to reflect the diversity of communities that the media operate in. So gender diversification within the newsroom and in the representation with the media is important. And there are, organizations, even media organizations out there that are recognizing. UNESCO has documented this and noted that it's an important area. The World Association of Newspaper Editors has also said this is an important area for them to be focusing on. So
Right.
we really hope that this research findings provide evidence that the media can look on and work to develop policies and regulations that can address the issues that we bring out in this research.
Right. Now, Lilian, you would agree with me that well-crafted TV shows, some of them new shows, have become order of the day, and these shows are some of them are run by women, both in Africa and in the Western world. Now, could this and the Christine Amampo experience be considered as a gap closing step?
Yes, there's that element. I would call it a good example.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of those to say it's a gap closing because the research shows us that the gap is still there in terms of news reporting and representation overall in the media.
Okay.
So while we have the Christian Amampos of this world, they are few and far between. We have examples of good practice. So we have shows that are deliberately focused on women and providing women's point of view. For example, in the United States, the PBS network provides a show, I think, on Sundays called To the Contrary, which features women talking and discussing political issues and political news, which is something rare you don't find. A lot of political talk shows, news talk shows, have a lot of male guests that are run by men. So you don't tend to see a lot of women. So that is an example. So we have such shows, but they are few and far between. We need more examples of those.
Okay.
And more examples, more women reporting the news, all aspects of the news, not just soft news.
Okay, Doctor, could you briefly describe the methodology that was used in this study?
This is a content analysis. So we basically looked at media output, the content. Which again limits us to talking about what we find in the media, not, employment patterns and all that. So we looked at newspaper articles, online stories and Twitter news, and television newscasts and radio newscasts. So those are that's the methodology that was used, was a content analysis, and this has been done every 5 years since 1995.
Okay.
It is the longest longitudinal study of women and news in the world. And in this 20 years we've done it, it provides a broad overview and the ability to take a long-term view of what the trends are.
Right.
And, it doesn't look good. The progress has been so slow for the last 20 years that it will really take a long time. So we're calling this as an urgent action for media to take a look at and address the issue of representation of women in the media.
Right. And I'm looking at this 2020 when it is expected that the gap would have been closed. But who is going to take the responsibility to do that? Is it the government? Is it the media? Who has to react?
The media is the key one here. Media policies, media ethics. Media ethics call for fair and balanced representation. I think the media needs to work hard at enforcing that, recognizing that gender justice is also part of media justice and fair representation. We also have civil society activists who need to be able to continue to hold the media accountable through bringing out research like this and pointing out to the media. So the media itself needs to work on this. We need civil society to be on board, and governments need to follow up on their own commitments to gender equality and making sure that the media follow up on these as well.
Rich knowledge there from Dr. Lilian Ndangam. Lilian, I want to thank you so much. But before you go away, what role did you play in this study?
I was part of the team that coordinated the research. So I coordinated with researchers in these countries, and I also wrote up this part of the study together with my colleague, Dr. Mocharia.
Okay.
And my role was coordinating and also writing the report.
So, are we having the next study in 2020?
Yes, and hopefully we hope to see much more change and better representation of women by then. So it is my hope that things would have improved.
Much more change.
We hope to use the next 5 years to advocate for such changes.
Much more change and better representation of women. By then, Lilian, thank you so much for accepting this interview and for this good education which we've benefited from this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Lilian Ndangam is a communication research expert, and she has been analyzing the 2015 Global Media Monitoring Project survey result that was published last week. Okay, let's have some beautiful music, and we will make another stopover in Bamenda, where journalist Clementina Young will also be painting a picture of women's involvement in the media out there.